I thought my business partner was my best friend who genuinely cared about me, but he was actually controlling every aspect of my life and isolating me from romantic relationships so I would stay dependent on him. He wanted to steal my company and leave me with nothing while he started a new business with his ex-girlfriend. My business partner Joseph, 35M, just cost me another relationship. Yesterday my girlfriend Elena, 26F, broke up with me because she said I was more committed to Joseph than to her. She told me she refused to be the third wheel in what looked like a marriage between two business partners. I'm Jake, 29M, and I've been running a digital marketing agency with Joseph for 3 years now. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. My previous girlfriend Sarah broke up with me 8 months ago for similar reasons. She said I spent more time with Joseph than with her and that our relationship felt like an afterthought. At the time I thought she was being dramatic and didn't understand how demanding our business was. Now I'm starting to wonder if there's a pattern here. Let me give you some background about how Joseph and I ended up as partners. We met in college where we both studied business administration. Joseph was always the charismatic one who could sell ice to an Eskimo while I was better with numbers and strategy. After graduation we both worked at different marketing firms for a couple years before deciding to start our own agency. The timing felt right because we had saved up some money and had made connections in the industry. Starting the business wasn't easy. We spent the first year working out of Joseph's apartment because we couldn't afford office space. We were pulling 16-hour days trying to land our first clients and build a reputation. During those early months we basically lived together. We'd work until midnight, then grab beers and plan the next day's strategy. On weekends we'd attend networking events together or work on proposals. Joseph would joke that we saw each other more than most married couples. The hard work paid off. By our second year we had landed several major clients and moved into a proper office downtown. We hired 3 employees and started generating serious revenue. Joseph handles sales and client relationships while I manage operations and finances. We make all major decisions together and split profits 50-50. The business has been growing steadily and we're on track to hit 7 figures in revenue this year. But success came with its own challenges. The bigger we got, the more time we had to spend together. We travel to client meetings at least twice a month. Joseph insists we stay in the same hotel because it's easier to coordinate our schedules. We usually end up having dinner together and going over the next day's agenda late into the night. When we're back in town we often work past regular hours and grab dinner afterward because we're both too tired to cook. Joseph is also the type of person who calls or texts at all hours when he has an idea or wants to discuss something. He'll send me articles at 11 p.m. that he thinks are relevant to our business. He expects quick responses because he says timing is crucial in our industry. I've gotten used to keeping my phone on all the time in case he needs something urgent. Our social lives have become intertwined too. Joseph knows all my friends and I know his. We often end up at the same parties or events because we move in similar professional circles. Joseph is single and has been for the past year since his last relationship ended. He says he's too focused on the business right now to date seriously. He often jokes that I'm the only constant relationship in his life. The problems with Sarah started about 6 months into our relationship. She complained that I never turned off my phone during our dates. Joseph would text or call and I'd always answer because it might be about a client emergency. Sarah said it felt like Joseph was always the third person on our dates. She also didn't like that Joseph and I had weekly dinners to discuss business strategy. These usually happened on Tuesday nights and could go until 10 or 11 p.m. Sarah got particularly upset when Joseph and I had to travel to Chicago for a 3-day client presentation during her birthday weekend. I had offered to take her somewhere nice the following weekend to make up for it, but she said that wasn't the point. She felt like the business and Joseph always came first in my priorities. I tried to explain that this was a crucial time for our company and that the Chicago client could make or break our expansion plans. The final straw with Sarah came when Joseph got food poisoning the night before our biggest presentation of the year. I canceled my plans with Sarah to go to Joseph's apartment and help him prepare backup materials in case he couldn't present the next day. Sarah said this proved that Joseph would always be more important to me than she was. She broke up with me 2 days later. After Sarah I took a break from dating for a few months to focus on work. When I met Elena at a friend's party I thought things would be different. Elena worked as a nurse and had her own demanding schedule, so I figured she'd understand the pressures of running a business. She seemed impressed when I told her about the agency and how Joseph and I had built it from scratch. The first few months with Elena went well. She was understanding when I had to work late or travel for business. She even came to a few company events and got along well with Joseph. They would joke around and Joseph would tell her stories about our early days when we were broke and desperate for clients. Elena said she liked hearing about our friendship and how we supported each other through the difficult times. But gradually Elena started making comments similar to what Sarah had said. She noticed that Joseph and I texted constantly throughout the day even when we were sitting in the same office. She pointed out that we often finished each other's sentences and seemed to communicate without words during meetings. Elena said watching us work together was like watching a married couple who had been together for decades. Elena also started questioning our travel arrangements. She asked why Joseph and I always booked connecting rooms when we traveled for business. I explained that it was practical because we often needed to review materials late at night or early in the morning before client meetings. She said it seemed excessive and that most business partners she knew didn't spend that much time together outside of office hours. The situation with Elena came to a head last month during our company retreat. Joseph had organized a 3-day trip to a resort in the mountains for team building with our employees. Elena was invited as my +1 and initially seemed excited about the getaway. But during the trip she started acting distant and withdrawn. On the second night of the retreat, Joseph and I stayed up until 2 a.m. in the hotel bar discussing expansion plans and potential new hires. Elena had gone to bed early saying she had a headache. When I got back to our room she was still awake and asked where I had been. I told her about the business discussion and she just turned away without saying anything. The next morning Elena barely spoke to me during breakfast. When the group went hiking she hung back with some of the other employees instead of walking with Joseph and me like she had the previous day. During the drive home she was quiet, and when I asked if something was wrong she said she needed time to think about our relationship. Elena called me 2 days later and said she wanted to meet for coffee to talk. That's when she told me she was ending our relationship. She said watching Joseph and me during the retreat made her realize that I was already in a committed partnership and there wasn't room for anyone else. She said we functioned like a married couple and that any girlfriend would always be an outsider trying to break into an established dynamic. Elena specifically mentioned several things that bothered her. She said Joseph and I had our own language of inside jokes and references that made others feel excluded. She noticed that we always sat next to each other during meals and seemed to instinctively coordinate our movements and decisions. Elena said when one of us left the table the other would automatically follow a few minutes later. She also brought up our living situations. Elena had noticed that Joseph and I both lived in apartments in the same building downtown. We had moved there 6 months ago because it was close to the office and we found a good deal on 2 units. Elena said it seemed like we were playing house and that most business partners didn't choose to live in such close proximity. The conversation with Elena lasted 2 hours and she was clearly upset about ending things between us. She said she cared about me but couldn't compete with the relationship I had with Joseph. Elena told me that unless I was willing to establish clear boundaries between my business partnership and personal life she didn't see how I could maintain a serious romantic relationship. After Elena left I sat in the coffee shop for another hour trying to process what had happened. 2 different women had now told me essentially the same thing about my relationship with Joseph. Both Sarah and Elena had said they felt like outsiders in their own relationships with me. Both had pointed to specific behaviors and patterns that made them uncomfortable. I started thinking about my daily routine and realized that Joseph and I probably did spend more time together than most business partners. We commute to work together most days since we live in the same building. We eat lunch together almost every day either at the office or at nearby restaurants while discussing client projects. We usually stay late to review the day's work and often grab dinner afterward. Our weekends often involve business activities too. Joseph and I attend networking events together or meet with potential clients over coffee or drinks. When we're not working we sometimes hang out anyway because we've become close friends over the years. Joseph doesn't have a large social circle outside of work and I've become one of his primary sources of companionship. I also realize that Joseph has keys to my apartment and I have keys to his. We exchanged them when we moved into the building in case of emergencies or if one of us got locked out. Joseph has used his key a few times when I wasn't answering my phone and he needed documents or files that were in my apartment. I've used his key once when he was sick and asked me to bring him soup and medicine. Looking back I can see how these arrangements might seem unusual to someone dating one of us. Sarah had asked me once why Joseph needed access to my apartment and I had explained it was for convenience. She seemed skeptical but didn't push the issue further. Elena never directly questioned the key situation but I noticed she seemed uncomfortable when Joseph would let himself into my apartment to grab something. There are other small things that probably contributed to both relationships ending. Joseph often bought me coffee or lunch without being asked and I did the same for him. We had developed habits over the years of looking out for each other in small ways. Joseph would pick up my dry cleaning if he was already going and I would grab groceries for both of us when I was at the store. We also developed a system of nonverbal communication during client meetings. Joseph would give me subtle signals about when to present certain information or when to let him take the lead in negotiations. We could have entire conversations with just glances and gestures which probably looked strange to outsiders who didn't understand our working relationship. I'm starting to realize that Joseph and I may have crossed some boundaries without realizing it. What felt natural and efficient to us probably seemed inappropriate to the women I was dating. The level of intimacy and coordination in our business partnership might be incompatible with maintaining a separate romantic relationship. But I'm also confused about what I should do differently. Joseph and I built this business together through years of hard work and sacrifice. Our close working relationship is part of what makes us successful. We trust each other completely and can anticipate each other's needs and reactions. This dynamic has helped us win clients and grow the company. I don't want to jeopardize our business by creating artificial barriers between us. At the same time, I don't want to end up alone because no woman can tolerate the way Joseph and I work together. I'm wondering if there's a way to maintain our professional partnership while also making room for romantic relationships. The timing of this situation is particularly challenging because we're in the middle of negotiations for our biggest client contract ever. Joseph and I have been working around the clock preparing proposals and presentations. We can't afford to have any disruption in our working relationship right now. But I also can't keep losing relationships because women feel like they're competing with my business partner. I haven't talked to Joseph about any of this yet. I'm not sure how to bring up the subject without making him defensive or worried about our partnership. Joseph has made comments in the past about how girlfriends can become distractions from business goals. He might see this as proof that romantic relationships aren't worth the complications they create. I need advice on how to handle this situation. Should I talk to Joseph about establishing boundaries even though it might affect our business? Is it possible to maintain the close working relationship that makes us successful while also making space for romantic partners? Or do I need to choose between business success and personal relationships? Update 1: A lot has happened since my original post and I wanted to update everyone on the situation. I ended up having the conversation with Joseph about boundaries and it didn't go the way I expected at all. I waited about a week after Elena broke up with me before bringing up the subject with Joseph. We were working late on a Thursday night preparing for the big client presentation I mentioned in my original post. Around 9 p.m. I suggested we order dinner and talk about something important. Joseph seemed curious but not concerned when I said we needed to discuss our working relationship. I started by telling Joseph about my conversation with Elena and how she had broken up with me. His immediate reaction was to say that Elena obviously didn't understand what it takes to run a successful business. Joseph said she was probably jealous of our success and looking for reasons to cause problems between us. He suggested that I was better off without someone who couldn't support my professional commitments. When I explained that this was the second relationship that had ended for similar reasons, Joseph got more defensive. He said both Sarah and Elena sounded needy and unrealistic about the demands of entrepreneurship. Joseph pointed out that we were building something important together and that any woman worth dating should understand and respect that priority. I tried to explain that both women had made valid points about our boundaries and that maybe we had gotten too comfortable with arrangements that seemed inappropriate to outsiders. Joseph listened, but I could tell he was getting frustrated with the direction of the conversation. He kept interrupting to defend specific examples I brought up. When I mentioned the apartment keys, Joseph said that was just practical since we lived in the same building and worked together every day. He reminded me about the time he had food poisoning and I was able to bring him documents he needed for a client call the next morning. Joseph said eliminating these conveniences would make our business less efficient. The conversation got more tense when I brought up our travel arrangements. Joseph said sharing hotel rooms or booking connecting rooms saved money and made coordination easier during client trips. He pointed out that we often had to review materials or practice presentations late into the night and having separate rooms would be inconvenient. Joseph also defended our communication habits. He said the constant texting and calling was necessary in our fast-paced industry where opportunities could disappear quickly. Joseph reminded me about several deals we had closed because one of us reached out to the other immediately when we heard about a potential client or learned important information about competitors. The conversation went on for almost 2 hours and Joseph became increasingly agitated as it progressed. He said he couldn't believe I was questioning the foundation of our successful partnership because of complaints from women who didn't understand our business. Joseph accused me of being willing to sabotage everything we had built together for the sake of relationships that obviously weren't going to work out anyway. Toward the end of our discussion, Joseph said something that really bothered me. He told me that romantic relationships were temporary but our business partnership was permanent. Joseph said he had seen too many successful men get distracted by women and lose focus on their professional goals. He suggested that I should stay single until we had grown the company to the point where we could afford distractions. I tried to explain that I didn't want to choose between business success and personal relationships, but Joseph said that was naive. He told me that every successful entrepreneur had to make sacrifices and that romantic partnerships were often incompatible with the demands of building a company. Joseph said if I wasn't willing to prioritize our business, then maybe I wasn't as committed to success as he thought. The conversation ended with both of us frustrated and angry. Joseph said he needed to think about whether we wanted the same things from our partnership. I went home that night wondering if I had made a mistake by bringing up the boundary issue. Our working relationship was definitely strained and we still had the big client presentation coming up. Over the next few days, Joseph was polite but distant at work. He responded to necessary communications but didn't engage in our usual casual conversations throughout the day. Joseph stopped suggesting lunch plans and didn't text me after work hours like he normally did. The change in his behavior was obvious to our employees who started asking if everything was okay between us. The client presentation was scheduled for the following Tuesday and we needed to coordinate our materials and practice our pitch. Despite the tension between us, we managed to work together professionally. Joseph and I had developed such strong communication habits over the years that we could still function effectively even when our personal relationship was strained. The presentation went well and we ended up winning the contract, which was worth more than $300,000 in revenue for our agency. After the client meeting, Joseph suggested we celebrate with drinks, but the conversation felt forced and awkward. We were both trying to act normal, but the underlying tension was still there. That weekend I decided to do some research about business partnerships and boundary issues. I found several articles about co-founders who had struggled with similar problems. Apparently it's common for business partners who work closely together to develop relationships that can interfere with their personal lives. Some experts recommended establishing formal policies about communication schedules and travel arrangements. I also talked to my friend David, who runs a consulting firm, with his college roommate. David told me that he and his partner had gone through a similar situation a few years ago when David's wife complained about their working relationship. They ended up setting specific boundaries around after-hours communication and social activities. David said it took some adjustment but ultimately strengthened both their business and their marriages. On Monday morning, I approached Joseph about implementing some of the boundary suggestions I had researched. I presented it as a way to professionalize our partnership and avoid future complications. Joseph listened to my proposals, but his response was not encouraging. Joseph said that formal boundaries and policies would destroy the spontaneous collaboration that made us successful. He argued that our best ideas came from informal conversations and brainstorming sessions that happened outside of normal business hours. Joseph said implementing rigid communication schedules would slow down our decision-making and give competitors an advantage. He also rejected the idea of changing our travel arrangements or living situations. Joseph said these choices save time and money while improving our coordination. He accused me of trying to fix problems that didn't exist and said the real issue was my poor choice in romantic partners. The conversation escalated into our first real argument since becoming business partners. Joseph said I was being manipulated by women who were jealous of our success and wanted to create problems between us. He accused me of being willing to damage our partnership to appease people who had already broken up with me anyway. I tried to stay calm, but Joseph's attitude was making me angry too. I pointed out that losing two relationships for the same reasons might indicate that we had developed some unhealthy patterns. Joseph responded by saying that any woman worth dating would understand and support my business commitments instead of trying to interfere with them. The argument ended with Joseph walking out of the office and not returning for the rest of the day. Our employees definitely noticed the tension and I had to make excuses about Joseph dealing with a family emergency. I spent the afternoon wondering if our partnership could survive this disagreement. Joseph came back to work the next day, but his attitude toward me had changed significantly. He was professional during meetings and client calls but avoided any personal interaction. Joseph stopped sharing his ideas with me informally and started communicating mostly through email even when we were sitting in the same office. The change in Joseph's behavior affected our entire team dynamic. Our employees were used to seeing us collaborate closely and finish each other's thoughts during meetings. The new formal distance between us made everyone uncomfortable, and some of our staff started asking if one of us was planning to leave the company. I realized that Joseph's reaction to my boundary suggestions was more extreme than I had expected. Instead of being willing to discuss compromises, he seemed to view any changes as a betrayal of our partnership. Joseph was treating my concerns about work-life balance as an attack on everything we had built together. This situation made me start questioning other aspects of our business relationship. I began to notice that Joseph often dismissed my opinions when they differed from his preferences. During client meetings, he would sometimes override decisions we had made together if he decided to change strategy at the last minute. Joseph had always been the more dominant personality in our partnership, but I was starting to see patterns of controlling behavior. I also realized that Joseph had gradually taken control of most client relationships over the years. While I handled operations and finances, Joseph was the primary contact for almost all of our major accounts. This meant that if our partnership dissolved, Joseph would likely be able to take most of our business with him. Looking back, I could see that Joseph had structured our company in ways that made him essential and me more replaceable. He had developed personal relationships with clients that went beyond our formal business arrangements. Joseph often socialized with client executives and had become friends with several of them outside of work. Meanwhile, my role had become more focused on internal operations and administrative tasks. While these functions were important for running the company, they didn't create the same level of loyalty among clients. If Joseph decided to start his own agency or join a competitor, he could probably convince most of our clients to follow him. This realization made me understand why Joseph was so resistant to changing our working relationship. The current arrangement gave him significant control over both our business and my personal life. Any boundaries I established might reduce his influence and make me more independent. I decided to schedule a meeting with our company attorney to discuss the legal structure of our partnership and my options if the relationship became unworkable. I also started researching other marketing agencies in case I needed to look for employment elsewhere. The conversation with Joseph had opened my eyes to how vulnerable my position had become. Update 2: The situation with Joseph has gotten much worse, and I discovered some things that completely changed my perspective on our partnership. What I thought was a boundary issue turned out to be something much more serious. After my last update, Joseph continued to be cold and distant at work. He started excluding me from client calls that I would normally attend and made important decisions without consulting me. Joseph also began staying late at the office when he knew I had left for the day and coming in early before I arrived. It felt like he was actively avoiding spending time with me. Our employees definitely noticed the change in our dynamic. 2 of our staff members asked me privately if everything was okay with the business. I tried to reassure them that Joseph and I were just working through some operational disagreements, but I could tell they weren't convinced. The tension was affecting office morale and productivity. About 3 weeks ago, Joseph announced that he was hiring a new account manager without discussing it with me first. According to our partnership agreement, major hiring decisions were supposed to be made jointly. When I questioned Joseph about the decision, he said we needed additional help managing client relationships and that he had found the perfect candidate. The new hire turned out to be Joseph's ex-girlfriend from college named Jessica, 31F. Joseph had mentioned Jessica occasionally over the years, but I had never met her before. Jessica had been working at a competing agency, and Joseph convinced her to join our company by offering a significant salary increase and equity stake. I was uncomfortable with Joseph hiring his ex-girlfriend without consulting me, but I tried to be professional about the situation. Jessica seemed qualified for the position and came with good references from her previous employer. Joseph assured me that their past relationship wouldn't interfere with business decisions. However, it quickly became apparent that Joseph was treating Jessica differently than other employees. He gave her access to client information that was typically restricted to partners. Joseph also started including Jessica in strategic planning meetings that had previously been limited to the 2 of us. Within her first week, Jessica was attending client dinners and presentations alongside Joseph. I confronted Joseph about Jessica's unusual level of access and responsibility for someone who had just started at the company. Joseph said that Jessica's experience made her valuable for high-level client work and that we needed to utilize her skills effectively. He dismissed my concerns as jealousy and said I was being territorial about company operations. The situation escalated when I discovered that Joseph had given Jessica access to our financial records and client contracts. This information was supposed to be restricted to partners and our accounting firm. When I asked Joseph about this decision, he said Jessica needed the information to properly manage client accounts. I started to suspect that Joseph was planning something behind my back, so I decided to do some investigating. I contacted our attorney to review what information Jessica should legally have access to as an employee versus a partner. The attorney confirmed that giving her contract details and financial records was unusual and potentially problematic. I also reached out to Jessica's previous employer under the pretense of checking references. During that conversation, I learned something shocking. Jessica had been fired from her previous job for accessing confidential client information without authorization. Her former boss told me that Jessica had been caught copying client lists and strategic documents shortly before she left the company. When I confronted Joseph with this information, he admitted that he knew about Jessica's termination but said she had been unfairly treated by her previous employer. Joseph claimed that Jessica had been scapegoated for problems caused by other employees and that her former boss was trying to damage her reputation. He accused me of going behind his back to investigate Jessica and said I was trying to sabotage her employment. This conversation revealed something disturbing about Joseph's judgment and honesty. He had deliberately hired someone with a history of confidentiality violations and given her access to sensitive company information. Joseph had also lied to me about Jessica's background and tried to hide the circumstances of her departure from her previous job. I decided to document everything that had happened and schedule a formal meeting with our attorney. Before that meeting could take place, I discovered something even more concerning. While working late one evening, I noticed that Jessica was still in the office after everyone else had left. I went to check on her and found her at Joseph's computer accessing client files. Jessica claimed that Joseph had asked her to review certain accounts and prepare reports for morning meetings. However, when I checked with Joseph the next day, he said he hadn't given Jessica any such assignment. When I pressed him about the discrepancy, Joseph became defensive and accused me of spying on employees. That weekend, I decided to do a thorough review of our computer systems and file access logs. What I discovered was alarming. Jessica had been accessing far more information than necessary for her job responsibilities. She had downloaded client contact lists, financial data, and strategic planning documents. Some of this information had been copied to external drives. I also found evidence that Joseph had been sharing confidential information with Jessica through personal email accounts rather than company systems. This appeared to be an attempt to avoid leaving digital traces of their communications. The timing of these emails coincided with Jessica's access to restricted files. I confronted Joseph with this evidence on Monday morning and demanded an explanation. Joseph initially tried to deny the unauthorized access, but when I showed him the computer logs, he changed his strategy. Joseph claimed that he and Jessica were working on a special project to improve client services and that the information access was necessary for their research. When I asked why this project hadn't been discussed with me as a partner, Joseph said it was still in preliminary stages and he wanted to develop the concept further before presenting it. This explanation didn't make sense given the scope of information that had been accessed and copied. I told Joseph that I was planning to involve our attorney and potentially contact clients about the security breach. Joseph became extremely angry and accused me of trying to destroy the company out of spite. He said that my paranoia and jealousy were making me see conspiracies where none existed. The argument escalated quickly and Joseph said things that revealed his true feelings about our partnership. He told me that I had always been the junior partner and that he had built most of our client relationships through his own efforts. Joseph said that I was dispensable and that he could run the company without me if necessary. Joseph also made comments about my failed relationships with Sarah and Elena. He said that both women had been right to break up with me because I was too weak and indecisive to maintain their interest. Joseph suggested that I was projecting my personal failures onto our business relationship. This conversation lasted almost 3 hours and by the end Joseph had essentially threatened to force me out of the company if I continued questioning his decisions. He said that clients trusted him more than me and that employees would choose to stay with him if our partnership dissolved. Joseph claimed that I would struggle to succeed in the industry without his connections and reputation. After Joseph left that day, I contacted our attorney immediately and scheduled an emergency meeting. I also began copying important company documents and client information to protect my interests. The attorney advised me to document all interactions with Joseph and Jessica going forward and to avoid confronting them directly about ongoing investigations. Over the next week I gathered more evidence of inappropriate file access and information sharing. I also discovered that Joseph had been meeting with several of our major clients without including me in the discussions. Some of these meetings had taken place during times when Joseph claimed to be handling other business matters. The pattern that emerged suggested that Joseph and Jessica were planning to leave the company and take clients with them. The information they had been accessing and copying would give them everything needed to contact our clients and offer competing services. Joseph's recent behavior toward me made sense as an attempt to push me out before implementing their plan. I scheduled a meeting with our 3 employees to gauge their loyalty and understand how much they knew about Joseph's activities. During these conversations I learned that Joseph had been making comments about the company's future and suggesting that changes were coming. He had also been critical of my contributions to the business and had implied that I was holding back growth. 2 of our employees mentioned that Jessica had been asking questions about client preferences and contract terms that seemed unnecessary for her stated responsibilities. One employee said that Jessica had requested copies of client files that Joseph had authorized despite company policies restricting access to such information. Based on all this evidence, I concluded that Joseph was planning to either force me out of our current company or leave with Jessica to start a competing business. Either way, he was using his position to gather intelligence and prepare for a transition that would leave me without clients or employees. I made the difficult decision to consult with an employment attorney about my options for protecting the business and my interests. The attorney confirmed that Joseph's actions constituted breaches of our partnership agreement and potentially illegal activity if client information was being misused. The attorney advised me to document everything and prepare for the possibility that our partnership would need to be dissolved through legal proceedings. He also suggested that I consider reaching out to clients directly to ensure they understood that any communications from Joseph or Jessica should be verified through official company channels. This situation has completely destroyed my trust in Joseph and made me realize how naive I was about his character. What I thought was a boundary issue related to my personal relationships was actually part of a larger pattern of controlling and manipulative behavior. Joseph had been gradually positioning himself to take control of our business while making me increasingly dependent on his decisions. Update 3: I'm writing this final update from my new office space after completely dissolving my partnership with Joseph. The past month has been exhausting, but I'm finally free from his manipulation and starting to rebuild my business independently. After discovering Joseph's plan to steal clients and potentially force me out, I decided to take action quickly. I met with our attorney and filed formal complaints about the breaches of our partnership agreement. The attorney advised me to act fast because Joseph and Jessica were likely planning to implement their scheme soon. I started by securing all company financial accounts and changing passwords for critical systems. As an equal partner, I had the legal right to protect company assets while the investigation proceeded. I also contacted our insurance company about potential liability issues related to the unauthorized access of client information. Next, I reached out to our 3 employees individually to explain the situation and offer them positions in a new company I was forming. 2 of them agreed to join me immediately, while the third decided to look for opportunities elsewhere. I was disappointed to lose one team member but understood that the situation was uncomfortable for everyone involved. The most challenging part was contacting our clients to explain what had happened. I scheduled meetings with our 5 largest accounts to discuss the partnership dissolution and reassure them about continuity of services. I provided documentation showing that Joseph had been accessing their information inappropriately and that I was taking steps to protect their interests going forward. 4 of the 5 major clients decided to continue working with me rather than Joseph. They appreciated my transparency about the situation and were concerned about the security breaches that had occurred. One client mentioned that they had noticed Joseph asking unusual questions during recent meetings that made more sense in light of my revelations. Joseph did not handle the dissolution process well. When he realized that I was taking legal action and contacting clients directly, he became extremely aggressive. Joseph sent threatening emails claiming that I was destroying the company and spreading false information about him and Jessica. He accused me of sabotaging years of hard work because I was jealous of his success. Joseph also tried to turn our remaining clients against me by claiming that I was unstable and had become paranoid about normal business activities. However, most clients were more concerned about the documented security breaches than Joseph's character assassination attempts. His defensive behavior actually reinforced my credibility with people who had worked with us for years. The legal process took about 3 weeks to resolve. Our attorney was able to negotiate a settlement that gave me control of the company name and most client relationships, while Joseph received compensation for his initial investment and some ongoing accounts. Joseph and Jessica were required to return all copied information and sign agreements preventing them from soliciting our former clients for 2 years. During the settlement negotiations, I learned more about Joseph's long-term planning. Jessica admitted that they had been discussing starting their own agency for several months before she joined our company. Joseph had recruited her specifically to help gather intelligence and prepare for their departure. Their relationship had also resumed romantically despite Joseph's claims that hiring her was purely professional. This revelation explained Joseph's extreme reaction to my boundary suggestions months earlier. He had been planning to leave the partnership anyway and viewed my attempts to change our dynamic as a threat to his scheme. Joseph needed me to remain dependent and distracted while he prepared his exit strategy. Looking back, I can see that Joseph had been manipulating me for much longer than I realized. His insistence on maintaining close personal boundaries wasn't about business efficiency but about control. Joseph wanted to prevent me from developing relationships that might give me perspective on his behavior or support during conflicts. The comments Joseph made about my failed relationships with Sarah and Elena were particularly revealing. He had actively encouraged me to prioritize our partnership over romantic relationships because isolated people are easier to control. Joseph benefited from my social isolation because it made me more dependent on his approval and companionship. I've been operating my new agency for 3 weeks now and business is going well. The clients who stayed with me have been supportive and several have referred new accounts. Working with my 2 remaining employees in a smaller setting has been refreshing after the tension and manipulation of the previous months. I've also started dating again and met someone new named Amanda, 28F, who works as a teacher. Amanda has her own busy schedule and understands work pressures without feeling threatened by professional commitments. I've been careful to maintain clear boundaries between work and personal time based on what I learned from the Joseph situation. Amanda and I have talked about my experience with the business partnership and she's helped me recognize other ways that Joseph was controlling. She pointed out that healthy business relationships don't require partners to live in the same building or maintain constant communication. Amanda also noted that Joseph's criticism of my romantic partners was inappropriate and manipulative. I'm still processing the emotional impact of discovering that someone I trusted completely was planning to betray me. Joseph and I had been through difficult times together while building the business and I believed we had developed a genuine friendship. Learning that his support and loyalty were largely strategic has been difficult to accept. However, I'm grateful that I discovered Joseph's true character before he could fully implement his plan. If I hadn't questioned our boundaries after losing 2 relationships, I might never have noticed the warning signs. Elena and Sarah were right to be concerned about my relationship with Joseph even though they couldn't have known about his ulterior motives. The financial impact of the partnership dissolution was manageable because I had been handling most operational responsibilities and maintained relationships with key vendors and service providers. My new company has lower overhead costs and I'm able to offer more competitive pricing to clients while maintaining better profit margins. I've learned valuable lessons about partnership agreements and business relationships that will help me avoid similar problems in the future. Any future business partnerships will include clear boundaries around communication, personal relationships, and information access. I'll also be more careful about recognizing manipulation and controlling behavior early in professional relationships. Joseph and Jessica did start their own agency, but they've struggled to gain traction without access to our former client relationships. The non-compete agreements have limited their ability to approach previous contacts and they're having to build their reputation from scratch. Several mutual contacts in the industry have mentioned that Joseph's reputation has been damaged by the circumstances of our partnership dissolution. I occasionally wonder if Marcus genuinely believed his actions were justified or if he always knew he was manipulating me. Either way, the outcome is the same and I'm better off without him in my life. The experience taught me to trust my instincts about people and situations rather than making excuses for behavior that makes me uncomfortable. My relationship with Amanda continues to develop in a healthy direction. She's met my family and friends, and everyone comments on how much happier and relaxed I seem compared to when I was working with Marcus. Amanda has helped me understand what normal professional boundaries look like and why my previous arrangement was problematic. I've also reconnected with some friends I had neglected during the years when Marcus dominated my social calendar. Several people mentioned that they had noticed changes in my behavior and availability but hadn't felt comfortable commenting at the time. Looking back, I can see how isolated I had become from my support network. The financial success of my new business has exceeded my expectations. Without Marcus taking half the profits and Jessica's unnecessary salary, I'm able to reinvest more money into growth and employee benefits. My 2 remaining team members have received significant raises, and we're planning to hire additional staff within the next few months. I've also been able to reduce my working hours and maintain better work-life balance. The constant pressure to be available at all times was largely driven by Marcus's demands rather than actual business needs. Most clients are perfectly satisfied with reasonable response times and professional boundaries. Several competitors in our industry have reached out to discuss potential partnerships or collaborations. Word has spread about the quality of work my new company produces and my reputation for ethical business practices. These opportunities wouldn't have been possible while I was tied to Marcus's increasingly problematic behavior. The legal settlement included provisions that prevent Marcus from disparaging me or my new business publicly. However, I've heard through mutual contacts that he continues to blame me privately for the failure of his venture with Jessica. Some former clients have mentioned receiving calls from Marcus attempting to win back their business, but his approach has been unsuccessful. Jessica's involvement with Marcus appears to have been primarily motivated by financial gain rather than genuine romantic interest. According to industry gossip, their personal relationship ended shortly after their business venture began struggling. Jessica has since left their company and is reportedly working for another competitor. I'm grateful that this difficult experience happened when it did rather than years later when the stakes might have been higher. Marcus's betrayal was painful, but it taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation and protecting myself in professional relationships. The skills I developed while dealing with his behavior have made me a stronger and more confident business owner. My advice to anyone in a similar situation would be to trust the people who care about you when they express concerns about your relationships. Sarah and Elena were trying to help me see problems that I was too close to recognize. Their perspectives were valuable even though I initially dismissed their concerns as jealousy or misunderstanding. It's also important to maintain independence in business partnerships and avoid arrangements that make you overly dependent on another person's decisions or approval. The healthiest professional relationships include clear boundaries and mutual respect rather than the enmeshment that characterized my partnership with Marcus. I'm now focused on continuing to grow my business while maintaining the work-life balance that allows me to pursue meaningful personal relationships. The experience with Marcus taught me that professional success isn't worth sacrificing your personal happiness and autonomy. Finding the right balance between ambition and well-being is an ongoing process, but I'm confident in the direction my life is heading. My business partner sabotaged every single relationship I had for 3 years until I finally discovered his shocking plan to steal my company and leave me with nothing while he started a new business with his ex-girlfriend. I thought my business partner was my best friend who genuinely cared about me, but he was actually controlling every aspect of my life and isolating me from romantic relationships so I would stay dependent on him. He wanted to steal my company and leave me with nothing while he started a new business with his ex-girlfriend. My manipulative business partner made me choose between him and having a normal dating life, so I finally said no to both and started my own successful company that's now competing against his failed venture after losing 2 amazing girlfriends in a row because they said my business partner was too involved in my personal life. I finally realized he was the real problem and had been manipulating me for years. My business partner and his ex-girlfriend secretly planned to steal all my clients and destroy my reputation. But I discovered their scheme just in time, and now they're the ones who lost everything. I discovered my trusted business partner was planning to betray me and take everything we built together, so I beat him at his own game and left him with nothing but broken dreams.